I'm J.R. Church. Welcome to today's analysis of the news. I want to take you to the book of Ezekiel today, to chapter 40 and following. I want to talk to you about a vision that Ezekiel had following the battle of Gog and Magog. Bear in mind that Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39 tell about a war of Gog and Magog against Israel, and that Israel will be burning the weapons for 7 years. To me, this sounds like the 7-year tribulation period. I don't think Israel will be burning the weapons 7 years into the Messianic era. When the Messiah comes, he can get rid of the weapons any way he wants to. He could speak them out of existence, for that matter. So I think these 7 years here have to do with the 7-year tribulation period. We come down to the later verses. It talks about the birds coming and eating the flesh of the slain on the battlefield. And my thinking is that will be the battle of Armageddon. And so the Lord will come and eventually will crush the combatants and put a stop to it. Well, in chapter 40, Ezekiel says that in the beginning of the year, in the 10th day of the month, that in the visions God brought him into the land of Israel and set him upon a very high mountain, by which was as the frame of a city on the south. Now get the picture here. This 10th day of the new calendar year is actually Yom Kippur. That's the 10th of Tishri. And so Ezekiel goes into in a vision on the 10th of Tishri to the Temple Mount, into the future. It's some future Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement. And he sees the frame of a city on the south. Now, understand, please, that the south of the Temple Mount today are the archaeological digs of the Israeli archaeologists. Before 1967, that area just south of the Temple Mount was an Arab cabbage patch. Today, they have dug up the southern buildings, the walls of Old Jerusalem. They have the steps that go up to the southern gates. They have even found baptismal pools where I think on the day of Pentecost 3,000 people were baptized. They found this southern steps where I think Jesus stood one day and preached. And when Jesus would enter the temple area, usually he would go up to the southern gate. It was on a week before his crucifixion that he rode the donkey through the eastern gate. Nevertheless, what Ezekiel sees here is a modern archaeological dig. I think he goes into the future to the generation in which you and I now live. He could not have come there and seen a frame of a city on the south before 1967. It wasn't there. But with the archaeological digs, there is the frame of the old city on the south of the Temple Mount today. And then verse 6 says, he came to the gate which looked toward the east, that's the eastern gate, and went up the stairs thereof. He went on to say that the gate it was a double gate. Said one gate was 1 reed broad, about 10.5 feet wide, and the other threshold of the gate, which was 1 reed broad. So there were 2 gates. Well, I want you to know that the temple eastern gate today has a stairs, just as is described here. Ezekiel went up the stairs. And it has 2 gates, and they are about 10.5 feet wide each. So it seems like Ezekiel is describing the modern Temple Mount, not necessarily today, but at the end of the tribulation period. Because he goes on to say in verse 16 of chapter 40, there were narrow windows to the little chambers and to their posts within the gate round about, and likewise to the arches, and the windows were round about inward, and upon each post were palm trees. Now, we have a very similar situation in the Temple Mount today. You can see the long, narrow windows, and on the inside you can see that it is arched. So that, and by the way, these were only built about 500 years ago, but Ezekiel saw them 2,500 years ago. So I'm thinking that Ezekiel saw the modern Temple Mount. And then in chapter 41, it says in verse 1, he brought me to the temple. So there's a Jewish temple there at this time. And measured the posts, 6 cubits broad on the one side, 6 cubits broad on the other side, which was the breadth of the tabernacle. So it was about 12 feet on each side. This says 6 cubits, and a cubit is actually not 18 inches long, but the cubit has been proven to be 20.67 inches long. So this 12 cubits wide here is around 22 feet wide. And it says that it's the breadth of the tabernacle. So the new Jewish sanctuary that is going to be built during the tribulation period, in which, by the way, the Antichrist will commit the abomination of desolation, will be a tabernacle. Not a fancy temple, but a temporary, makeshift, prefab type building that will house the Jewish liturgy for temple worship during the tribulation period. And he says this is the most holy place. Fascinating, isn't it? And then he goes on to say in chapter 42, when he had made an end of the measuring of the inner house, he brought me forth toward the gate, whose prospect is toward the east, and measured it round about. That is the eastern gate. Then he says he measured the east side with a measuring reed, 500 reeds, with a measuring reed round about. He measured the north side, 500 reeds, with a measuring reed round about. He measured the south side, 500 reeds, with a measuring reed. Turned about to the west side and measured it, 500 reeds with a measuring reed. He measured it by the 4 sides. It had a wall round about, 500 long and 500 broad, to make a separation between the sanctuary and the profane place. Well, there is a profane place on the mountain today. It's called the Mosque of Omar. And if we were to start at the eastern gate and go 500 cubits by 500 cubits by 500 cubits by 500 cubits, that would map out an area on the north side of the Mosque of Omar for the Jews to be able to set up a sanctuary, a tabernacle of sorts. In fact, back in Ezekiel chapter 37 actually, the last few verses of 37, God says, I'll make a covenant of peace with them, and it'll be an everlasting covenant with them, and I'll place them and multiply them, and will set my sanctuary in the midst of them forevermore. My tabernacle also shall be with them. So when the Jews are allowed to take the northern half of the Temple Mount, and somehow or another the Antichrist or the one world government, whoever establishes this covenant between Israel and the Palestinians, will allow Israel to have the northern half of the Temple Mount, while the 2 Muslim mosques remain on the southern half of the Temple Mount. So I think, like